I've learned that the best founders are always selling.
Welcome to the GTM Vault podcast, hosted by Rick Koleta. We uncover the strategies, the pivots, and the breakthroughs, turning startups into giants. Let's crack, open the vault, and find out how.
Welcome to the GTM Vault podcast, where top growth operators reveal the systems behind explosive pipeline growth. I'm your host, Rick Koleta, and today we're exposing how one founder is turning podcast appearances and cold email into a predictable high-ticket client machine. Our guest is Charles Cormier, a growth operator who's launched 10,000 plus cold email campaigns, interviewed more than 2,500 founders, and built systems that consistently generate 50 plus qualified meetings per month. Through PodPire and PersanaLeads, he's cracked the code on turning podcast leads into 10 high-ticket clients monthly, while most treat podcasts as just branding. But here's what's wild. Charles claims 90% of founders overcomplicate lead gen, and his zero fluff approach using Clay, AI agents, and post-call conversion systems is outperforming bloated tech stacks. Is this the future of lean execution-focused GTM? Today, we'll unpack how to structure a 2025 cold email system that bypasses spam filters and gets replies, why podcasts are his number one lead source, and how to qualify, show the post-call conversion engine most teams miss after booking the meetings, how AI agents are replacing 80% of manual outreach without sounding robotic. If you're in B2B growth and tired of vanity metrics, this episode is your playbook. Let's dive in. Charles, you've said most founders overcomplicate growth. What's the number one mistake you see in GTM stacks today?
At first, most founders don't even think about growth. That's dramatic. That's pretty bad. Like they start a company, they focus on building the best product ever, just like I did with my first nootropic company in 2010-ish, and we never got off the ground because we didn't have more sales. We didn't have a sales system. And that happened with probably the first 5 companies that I ever launched. When it comes to people that think of growth and think of sales, yeah, they think of ads, right? Like they'll invest money on LinkedIn, pay $250 per lead. They'll go in directions that are quote unquote legit, right? That are used by 10,000 other founders, but they won't think about the one thing that can get them a very low cost per lead, which is cold email, right? Cold email is still the number one lead gen factor if you do it well. If you know deliverability, if you know copywriting, if you know product market fit, if you know how to target your ICP, if you know how to analyze results, right? So it's a complex stack of skills that most people do not have. And that's why they bring me in to help them with that. Now, a brief word on podcasting. Cold email, still very good, right? If you know infrastructure, if you know deliverability and so forth. But most people, the mistake that they do once they start a cold email campaign, they get in the spam. So some time ago, probably 4 years ago, I launched an agency that's fully about podcasting, right? So we bring podcasts to these founders. They interview their ICP on a podcast. And with that, they can get 30 discovery sales calls on a weekly basis, which is pretty intense. And they can get that forever without ever hurting deliverability. So long answer short.
What do you say about podcasting is often seen as brand building? How do you systemize it into a predictable lead gen engine with PodPire?
Yeah, podcasts as a branding, like 95% plus podcasts fail before 12 months, I believe is the stat, because people think they're going to be the next Joe Rogan because people invest like 200, $500 per episode. This is crazy, right? And they're not systematized. They don't know that they can cold email their ICP, get them on a show, use AI tools to pre-send them the questions, for example, and just systematize the whole process so that all they need to do is hop on a 30-minute call and build a relationship with their ideal customer persona. They think of a podcast monetization as sponsors or AdSense revenue, which is great, right? I do that as well. But we need to start with lead gen when it comes to podcasts. We need to start with closing clients. That's the fastest way to monetize a podcast. You get 10 per week and include your sales cycle in there. Mine is around 14 to 28 days. In 2 to 4 weeks time, I'm closing 5K deals. Like if I got 10 podcasts per day, that's at least one client a day. So I'll be tempted to redo the podcast experience again, right? If I can close dollar deal every day, and that's MRR, I'll want to do the podcast again. Most people, they don't have any direction. They want to be like a radio broadcaster or something, and they fail because they just realize that this is so much work. I need to pay for that. Sometimes I get crappy guests on the pod, right, that do not drop any type of value. They drop shit on the pod, and then you're like, why am I even doing this? I'm just wasting my time here. So they stop podcasting. So podcasting is not a brand play. If you're in B2B, right? B2B is my audience. Podcasting is a lead gen play.
Walk us through your 2025 cold email stack. What's your reply rate secret?
Yeah, I'll try to keep it short because it's somewhat complex. So I start on Namecheap. I buy 5.coms as alt domains, right? I host them on shared plan, Stellar Plus, it's called. So I'm paying like $8 per domain times 5, that's $40, $35 a year for hosting. Right? So we're at $75 here. Then I send through SendGrid Essentials 50K plan, that's $20 per month. And then I use Instantly. Instantly is $80 per month, and that will allow you to send you to 25K contacts. They also do the warm-ups, right? I use my contacts for a bunch of sources, Apollo, Contact Out, Marina, and a bunch of other tools. I scrape a lot as well with Apify. Apify is quite good for that. And I use Clay, but I use Persona more because I'm affiliated with Persona, which is a YC company that does the same as Clay, right? And sort of advising them. So quite bullish on these. So that's my stack. I don't track opens anymore, but it's around 50%. And my reply rate usually for the pod is around 3 to 4%. If it's a direct sales campaign, it will be more around 1% the reply rate. Call it 0.2% direct conversion rate on any campaigns that I start, which is pretty good.
Right. That's great. How do you qualify podcast appearances that actually drive deals versus just vanity metric?
It's my ICP. So in my case, for example, yesterday I was launching very filtered campaigns of ex-Palantir founders, for example, that have gone to a certain headcount. Their headcount growth is more than 25%. They're funded. For example, they have more than 2 sales members in their team, right? And a bunch of other filters like that. Revenue, not much because Apollo's revenue is not too incredible. And then I add AI filters on top of that, right? So who do they target? Are they B2B? Are they SaaS, right? Because I want B2B SaaS in the end. Have they hired X person the last couple of months? And then I can put triggers on top of that. And in the end, I get a very qualified list of, let's say, 97 individual. I'll invite them to podcast at first. And then if they don't react to that one, I'll directly pitch them saying that, hey, you're ex-Palantir and so forth. So yeah, that's pretty much how I do it.
From 2,500 interviews, what do high converting guests do differently before, during, and after shows?
So you mean like people that would become my clients, right? They are similar to me. They have similar values to me. They have similar mindsets to me. They're very ambitious. They're business killers, right? They're relentless. They're very intense. They're tech first. They're AI first, right? They're as nerdy as I am with tech stack, just that they don't have time, right? They're super busy. They drop top knowledge on the podcast. They're an open book, right? So they're learning machines. They do physical activity to increase their pain thresholds. So usually they're very similar to myself, right? And that's why I know that there's chemistry here, and I auto follow up with them after they become clients.
You built multiple ventures. What's the hardest lesson about scaling lead gen systems?
Yeah, the number one lesson, as I started with the in the podcast, is that if you don't have sales, you don't have a friggin' business. All my first businesses failed for one reason: I wasn't good enough at sales and marketing. Now, when you actually become good at lead gen, it's a whole other rabbit hole, as you know, right? You need to be very good at copywriting. I just use a well-prompted ChatGPT, and shout out to me after the episode if any of you need such a good cold email writer. I have a GPT that I built that I can give for free. Then, yeah, ICP and targeting. Are you obsessed enough about your ICP? Do you know who they are? Do you know how they think? Do you know their psychology? Do you know what they're driven about? Do you analyze constantly how they're thinking? in new eras, in the AI era, in the tariffs era. You constantly revisit their mindset and think for them, right? We like ChatGPT so much because it's a prediction machine, right? It can predict stuff, and that's a very strong determinant of intelligence. So you, an entrepreneur, as a founder, you need to predict where your market is going, what they're going to think, and why they're going to need your product. So PMF, product market fit obsession, I think is the greatest lesson out there. If you want to have a great startup that scales, you need to constantly obsess about PMF.
And is there any type of system that you use to move leads down the funnel after a meeting?
Yeah. So I have a closed GPT. My closed GPT, it's after they replied to my email, right? Or after we had a pod, I feed all their data in there, and then it replies with like a closing email. And the closing email, what is it? It's a plan with a timeline, with KPIs and ROI of if we would work together, right? And I also have it on Rails, so on a Zapier, right? So after the podcast call ends, I'm actually sending that email with a closed GPT algorithm. So yeah, and it can be as simple as a Calendly follow-up. Obviously, you won't be able to include AI into that, but you can go real fancy and use your CRM. I have a bunch of my clients that use Go High Level. I don't use any CRM. OpenAI and ChatGPT is my CRM. I could double click on that later because that's quite interesting. But I do send them a personalized email. Hey, we could work together, and it's super personalized to them, right? So I mentioned their ICP in the email. I mentioned what type of business they are. I mentioned competitors, for example. So I can get really deep in that. But after the bot is done, I'm sending such an email.
If you had K to rebuild your GTM stack from scratch today, where would you invest first?
Yeah, I'd only need like $200 a month, which is the beauty with my system, right? If I'd have 10K, I'd just scale it, right? I'd just hyper scale it. So I'd buy the instantly the $357 agency plan that gives me 2K leads per month. I would use a SendGrid, a dedicated IP that would bill me less per email sent, and I could send 250K emails per month. I would just overscale it that way. I would invest it in the exact same tech stack that I mentioned, right? So instantly SendGrid, Namecheap, I'd buy shitloads of domain. I'd buy like, with 10K, I'd buy at least 100 domains, and I'd have at least 10 mailboxes per domain. Not more, because that can get you flagged. Each mailbox, they're sending 20 emails per day, right? And for every 20 cold email that we're sending at least 100 warm up emails. So that's pretty much how I would do it.
You mentioned post-conversion, some AI that you're using. Can you talk about injecting GPT agents into this process without losing the human touch?
Yeah, I mean the human touch is greatly hyped, right? Like GPT has better human touch than most humans. So yeah, I described the closed GPT, but after a call, maybe I can talk about some other GPTs that I use to help me close them after the call. For example, I have a pain point GPT, right? That really helps me understand what is their current pain point. Granted, the market condition, right? So it's live plugged in everything that's happening in the market, and that may help shape the next email that I send them. I'll follow up a couple of times with a couple of emails, but after that, it's like, okay, are you convinced or not by what I do? Then I'll connect with them on LinkedIn, on Twitter, on YouTube. So technically they should see my content there. I'll drop a couple of remarketing campaigns every now and then. But yeah, I've been more bullish about LinkedIn than I am right now, because they suspended my account not so long ago from running a humoristic newsletter. More on that later. But yeah, like I'm not so bullish anymore about like pouring your heart into LinkedIn posts to follow up with clients, because yeah, if they're just gonna suspend me, then why stay there, right? So I'd say like newsletter is a way stronger one. I mean, newsletter is like a cold email, but they agreed to receive your newsletter. In my case, it's every day, right? I'm relentless. And yeah, at one point or the next, they're going to convert, because on my newsletter, I'm also sending them my GPTs for free. I'm sending them lists for free. I'm dropping top value on them, right? So the newsletter is really like a free value type of concept. And after receiving that for a while, they should eventually close. That is 15% to 30% in my best seasons of them.
That's a wrap on a masterclass in execution first GTM with Charles Cormier. If you take one thing away, lead gen isn't about more tools. It's about systems that work whether you're motivated or not. Want Charles's exact cold email templates or podcast follow-up playbook? Grab them in our show notes. For more proven GTM strategies, subscribe on YouTube at GTM Vault and join our free Substack where we break down episodes like this. If you're ready to turn your podcast appearances into pipeline, check out PodPire, link below. Until next time, build systems, execute relentlessly, and remember, growth isn't complicated until we make it that way. See you in the next episode.
Tech founders and VCs, careers, lessons, GTM.